I have been looking forward to this one for a while now. Hey bike geeks, from weight to wheels, price to performance, we're here to take a close look at bicycles so you can make an educated decision when selecting your next bike. In today's video, we're looking at the all-new 2024 Marin Four Corners 2. If you're new to these videos, my name is Graham and I'm the owner of a bicycle shop in Cochrane, Alberta, Canada. I take a close look at bikes, have a look at the details, features, talk about compatibility, what kind of rider or uses a bike might be compatible with, talk about the positives, and where there's negatives, we'll bring that up too. And in some cases we even bring up comparisons if there is a popular, common model in the category. In today's video, as we talk about the new Marin Four Corners 2, this is a 2024 bike. I'm going to just tell you the basics right now, and then we're going to go over all of the details. So to start with, this is basically a bike that crosses over from being either a drop bar commuter bike to being a pretty robust touring bike capable of doing some touring off-road. This is a chromoly frame and fork. Marin calls it Series 3. What that basically means is that it is a couple levels up from the most basic of steel or chromoly bikes that Marin makes. And those things that make it better include butted tubing. That isn't obvious at all by looking at a frame. Butting just means different wall thicknesses depending if we're looking near a weld, center of tube, or near the weld up there. That would be thicker wall thickness, thinner, thicker again. Also on that Series 3 will be things like thru axles and a little bit more shaping to the overall tubing. That would include things like on this headset having internal bearings as opposed to a press-in cup. So this is a chromoly touring / commuter bike, usable for a whole number of things, I would say, including just general daily adventure on gravel or paved roads. This is one of two different versions of the Four Corners. This is the better of the two. The Four Corners 2 in Canada is a $26.99 bike. In the States, this is $19.99. And then there is the Four Corners 1, which is a more simple version, a less elaborate frame, which doesn't include the thru axles, using quick releases instead. That one is in the mid $1,300 range in Canada or $9.99 in the States. The next step I'm going to go through in this video is we're going to have a close look at the components on this bike. We're going to talk about the fact that this is quite a unique geometry on this bike and maybe usage scenarios, and I do have some thoughts about sizing and fitting a bike that fits like this. So if you're in the market for a really durable, long-distance bike packing, touring, commuter type of bike, this may be a bike that you're interested in and you may want to keep on watching. If, in general, you like just listening to people who are total bike nerds, talking about bikes and showing you details, discussing things that maybe other reviewers, magazines, that sort of thing don't bring up, then consider liking and subscribing to this channel, because I try to bring up and cover a number of different bikes that range from mountain bikes to gravel bikes to things like this being an adventure, bike pack, touring type of a bike. So stick with me as we get into more of the details on this bike. So as I often do, I will start off the video with some of the things that people really want to know that is hard to find online. To start with, weight. This is 27.6 pounds, and I'm going to bring up a comparison right away. The Surly Disc Trucker, which is 28.5 pounds. So this is basically a pound lighter than one of the benchmarks in this sort of category. On this bike, depending on the size, there's 5 different sizes. The extra small and small will use 650B wheels. On the medium, large, and extra large, they will use these 700C wheels. And the maximum tire size that Marin recommends for these bikes is 50 millimeters wide. I say 50 millimeters because I got in trouble for saying 50C by somebody who is apparently offended by somebody saying 50C when tire size is 700C by whatever millimeters wide. Now I'm carrying on. Seat post diameter on this bike, 27.2 millimeters. The seat post is too short. It's only 350 millimeters long. That will be part of the fit and sizing discussion that we soon have. I discussed pricing already. I also, as I discussed the tire size maximum, with the wheel out, measuring at the shop, I was able to measure 2.7 inches being the width from inside a frame to inside a frame at the chainstays. So if you want to go above and beyond the recommended 50C, that'll give you a little bit of an idea of how much room you have to work with. I personally think that the 50C, or roughly a 2-inch mountain bike tire, is probably a pretty practical sort of size for this bike. Now, geometry on the bike is relatively progressive, and I will get into a few of those numbers using this size large as an example. So getting into the geometry, I just want to use this size large as an example to show how different the geometry is on this bike compared to a traditional drop bar in either gravel or in the road segments. So in many cases, if you're seeing a size large these days, you're going to be looking at something between about a 57 and maybe a 58.5 centimeter horizontal top tube. In this particular bike in size large, we are looking at 617 millimeters. And that measurement I'm talking about is from the center of the top of your head tube here, going straight back to where that would meet the center of your seat tube. So this is a very reachy bike. Now, part of the reason it is done that way is because for a size large, this 70 millimeter stem is quite a short stem. So that is where you have to combine that with that horizontal top tube measurement to come up with a realistic reach from seat to your handlebars. I still find this to be a little bit on the big side. So my first recommendation on this bike is, if you are near borders between sizes, think about stepping down. They have gone extremely generous on head tube length, so you won't be suffering from too short of a stack if you say size down to a medium instead of a large. In a medium, as an example, you're looking at a top tube effective of 58.6, so you're essentially looking at the reach of most larges and then shortening things up a little bit with that stem. And that, I think, is really appropriate if you're looking for a bike that's going to be getting long, casual miles, as opposed to a gravel or a road bike where you're thinking a little bit more about power to the pedals. So that is the only thing I've really noticed right off the bat with this bike regarding geometry, is the fact that you're probably going to be sizing down. I'm 6'1", and in many bikes, in the mountain bike world at least, I'm on the cusp between large and extra large. With this bike being something that I'm really fond of, I'm considering one for myself, and I'm actually thinking about going down to a size medium at 6'1", so it shows how dramatic the the lengths are on this bike. And I don't think it's a criticism, I think it's just something that you need to keep in mind if you're sizing one of these bikes. I have noticed, as an example, another bike that sort of compares to this. I before mentioned the Surly Disc Trucker being a very well-known bike in the hardcore bikepacking world. Another thing I have noticed is something like the Breezer Radar X. That bike I would have to probably go down to a 54, which is 2 sizes smaller, to get a reasonable reach. So for whatever reason, I think that these bikes are somehow bringing out extreme lengths, and I think it's somewhat in error. I'm going to show you a little bit later on. I usually try to hide my funny face on these videos, but I'm going to do a little bit of filming with me sitting on the bike and just talking about my concept, at least, of proper fit on a bike like this. So next I'm going into componentry. So one of the things that really got me excited about this bike when I saw the release is it was one of the first bikes that I'd seen in our 2024 bikes. I'd seen this, I think, spring of last year when we were making our commitments to get these bikes. But this was one of the first bikes I'd seen with this new SRAM Apex Eagle drivetrain. So like mountain bike world, if we call it Eagle, we're talking about 12 speed. And like in mountain bikes, if we're talking 12 speed, we're talking about a huge range of gears. So in this case, we're talking about a 10 tooth small up to a 52 tooth big ring on here. So in the world of packing your bike down and riding over just about anything from pavement to gravel to whatever, having a huge range of gears is going to be extremely practical. And so this was a real standout for me, the fact that this was on here, and when I saw this, at least, I hadn't even seen this group set mentioned yet. And I've looked even in aftermarket parts suppliers, and it is still a really tough thing to get your hands on. So this is a pretty special drivetrain that you have on here. Of course, I talked about the fact that we have thru axles on here. We have disc brakes with 160mm rotors. The thru axles and disc brakes is, I think, a 1-2 punch, especially if you're going to be loading a bike down. To not have quick releases, which leave some vagueness about your absolute wheel placement, or the ability for things to flex and causing brakes to rub. I think this thru axle for a bike, either it's going to be used aggressively or potentially packed down with gear, I think is really good. It'll minimize your chance of feeling any flex or of having random brakes rubbing on rotors because of flex happening. We have Marin's in-house rims on here. They're pretty wide. I think these were 25mm wide rims. We have a tire that we haven't really seen before. This is a Rocketman tire from V Tire. I don't know what to say about this tire, quite honestly. It looks all right. I would probably, if this was my own bike, be tempted to switch to something a little bit smoother than that, and maybe even bigger volume than the stock size on here. This is a 44C, and I would be tempted to go up to near that max, up to about a 50C wide tire. I have seen, since we've built 4 or 5 of these up already, we did have one warranty issue with one of these tires just blowing off the rim, and hopefully that's not an indication that quality may not be great. They are, I think, tubeless ready, and if I remember correctly from building one of these, I peeled the tire back to see that there is actually tubeless tape on the rims, so this would be a pretty quick and easy one to switch over to a tubeless setup, which might be quite practical for some people. Being a bike in this category, we of course have 2 different mounts down there, fender and rack mounts. We have the same thing up top here, so it's going to be quite easy to mount whatever you need to mount. We have really slender seat stays, and so that is going to be designed to just give you a little bit of compliance in the rear end, so you're not feeling every tiny little bump that you're going over quite so severely in your butt. On the frame, of course, we're going to have multiple water bottle mounts. I believe the spec is that we have 3 on the medium and larger frames, and then 2 on the small and extra small. I think that that'll mean that they're just losing the seat post mounted one to be able to allow for good seat post insertion. We have a threaded bottom bracket. I would say that that is a nice practical thing on a touring bike, because you might be out in the middle of nowhere and have to go to a bike shop, and if you need to get a new bottom bracket or anything, a thread in, thread out will be a relatively easy thing to switch out. You'll also see that little rubber plug right there. This bike is ready to go for a dropper seat post, which if this was going to be my bike, I would be very interested in putting a dropper on there. In addition to those water bottle mounts I mentioned, we also have a bento box, sort of a feed box area, something to mount up there, and then these mounts below the top tube for some custom frame bags if you'd like. If I remember correctly, these guys may have even put their measurements for this bike on their website so that you can go to a custom bag manufacturer and get something to fit quite precisely. The cables are externally routed. That once again is going to just make things a little bit easier if you have to do any switcheroos out in the field. Head tube on the bike is not tapered. That is the one thing, noticing a couple of reviews from things like the Radavist and bikepacking.com. One of those two sites mentioned the non-tapered, meaning that for the rare person that actually wanted to upgrade to either a suspension fork, which this isn't suspension corrected anyways, or a carbon fork, you're probably not going to find something with a straight steer tube. And I'm not quite sure if missing out on a tapered steer tube is a budget thing, or if this is purposefully done to give a little bit more compliance in the front end of the bike. Our forks, still a chromoly fork, not alloy. We have a 3-pack of braze-ons, so there's a number of different carriers that could be mounted that way. And then we have our thru axle and our fender and or rack mounts on there, as well as the crown of the fork having something. Now, I did mention these are hydraulic disc brakes, and I would guess there might be some people out there who would say they would prefer a mechanical if you're talking about a touring bike. These SRAMs have proven to be pretty robust as far as not requiring excessive maintenance, and of course if this thing is packed down, you are going to get excellent braking out of a hydraulic disc on there. So my personal preference would be for this setup, but there might be people out there operating in extreme environments that would like to maybe sacrifice some braking to get themselves something a little bit easier to service out on the road. It is a flat mount brake. I sometimes have reservations. It's often got to do with how nicely the frame is made. So far on these, of the 5 that we've built, we haven't had any issues getting brakes to align properly. So I think their tooling, when they're making the bikes, is accurate enough that there are no concerns as far as being able to get the brakes to align really nicely. As mentioned before when we were talking about the geometry, it's a 70mm long stem, so that is relatively short. The idea there being that this is a pretty wide handlebar, and that wide handlebar is going to basically make up for not having a long stem as far as keeping you in control of the front wheel and not feeling the bike getting too weird or twitchy. Relatively short reach, some nice rubbery feel to the bar tape there, and really nice shape to these SRAM Apex hoods. One thing I would have loved to have seen is if on the left side here, what with not having a shifter pod on there, is if they had put on the left hand lever that was already dropper post compatible, because that could have made a really easy clean install for a dropper post. But I will probably, if I do one of these myself, I'll be putting on a Fox dropper mount, which just mounts right on the inside here anyways, so I'm not overly concerned. So that gets into a lot of the spec. Sorry, I'll just show the fact that on this crank set here, we talked about the threaded bottom bracket. It is SRAM Apex, so a nice quality crank with nice quality external bottom bracket. And then it's a 40-tooth SRAM chainring, and it is a narrow wide. So between the chainring and the fact that this Apex clutch has or Apex derailleur has a pretty pronounced clutch in here, that means that we do still keep some good chain tension, and that's going to mean that we're that much less likely to bounce off a chain if we're rumbling along on gravel or on single track or something. For those unfamiliar, when you have a really strong clutch like this, what you'll have is a little button that you can depress right here, and that is going to be so that you can disengage your derailleur, have no tension in your chain, and then if you're doing a tire change, you will not be swearing at your bike. It's going to be about as easy as you can ask for. Once you do that, press it forward, that button sets itself back, and you're back in action. And that is a quick cover of a lot of the spec on this bike. And now we're going to talk a little bit about fitting of this bike, why I would consider sizing down, and just some of the things to consider for these like extraordinarily tall head tube type of bikes. And I'm not even sure if other bike fitters would agree with what I have to say, but yeah, I have my opinions and I'll share them with you. This is what I look like when I'm standing outside. This was me, I was talking, and I don't have a microphone attached to my camera, so I'm sitting there babbling along, but you can't really hear me very clearly. You can see I'm looking puzzled, probably looking awkward, because I'm on my back deck, and if one of my neighbors was to look over and not see the camera, he would probably think I am some sort of a crazy person talking to the barbecue. I'm not talking to the barbecue, I'm talking to the camera. So I'm puzzled on this bike. It's a size large. The 350mm seat post is not long enough for my legs. I'm an extremely long-legged 6'1" person, so not a huge surprise. But what I'd probably do to fix that is to put a dropper seat post on, which would have, I'm turning into a zombie. I'm about to start wandering forward. Okay, I'm going to put on a dropper seat post, which will have a much taller maximum height. What I was doing there in my zombie pose was just illustrating the fact that my back is a little bit more vertical than my arms are when I'm riding in the hoods, and I'm kind of perplexed how to make this bike work for me. As I watched this video, I realized probably the smartest move I can do is one of two things. I can drop my stem, flip it into the more horizontal mode, and down a couple spacers. That will even out my back and my arm angles. Or I could even do, as I originally thought, go with a size medium with the bars as high as possible. The biggest goal that I'm trying to go for on a bike like this that isn't designed for racing or for pure power is I want the angle of my back and my arms to be roughly equal. As you can see in my pose there, the arms kind of stick out at a more horizontal angle than my back is. So you can go about this in one of a couple different ways. This is getting into some of the stuff in the fit world where if you're sizing something for somebody who isn't looking for max performance and power, but looking for comfort, it feels like it fits outside a lot of the bike fitting best practices. I have a personal theory, and on observing myself on bikes when I fit right, is that back and arm angle need to end up being pretty similar, and then with my armpit sitting pretty much over top of my knees when I'm pedaling. A little bit like the old school thinking of knee over pedal, but if you think about it, being a total nerd like I am about the physics of the whole thing, the way the vectors line up, it makes sense that you would want the forces of your back and your arms lining up so that you're pushing against two equal angles and pushing to where those angles meet. So I'm probably going to end up doing some experiment personally on this bike. What I even said earlier in the video may not be completely true about always sizing down, but you may very well want to consider just playing with doing some long rides and trying handlebars at different heights, maybe playing with different length stems plus or minus 10 millimeters, just to make sure that before you go on a long bike packing trip, you are setting your body up for really good comfort. My comparison that I will use with a lot of customers when I'm talking about this is that idea of riding with your arms more horizontal in your back. The way the stresses work through your system, it ends up being a little bit like carrying a box away from your body. You're just putting a bit more tweak on your lower back, and I have a pretty tweaked lower back to start with. So now I'm stepping off my bike and I'm probably telling you that you should like and subscribe and look at the nice scenery, and I'm about to put the bike away. So thanks so much for watching. Like, subscribe. I love this bike. Need some tweaking just to make sure the fit works for me. I'm sure I'm going to be able to get a medium or a large to work for me. And I suspect that if you're patient with test riding and the shop that you're using, you'll be able to get one of these bikes to work perfectly for you. And that's me walking away. Thanks, guys.